I'm going to start by introducing the different aspects of the Hypi no-code editor. And throughout a series of videos, we'll put together a to-do application that showcases how you would use all the things that I'm going to summarize in this first video. So on screen now, you can see the design area of the editor. The design area is typically where you spend your time putting together the layout for your screens. On the left hand side of the design area, at the top you've got the list of widgets that are available for you to use to put your user interfaces together. At the bottom you have the widget tree, and this widget tree just basically shows you the current structure of the screen that you have laid out. Just above that, the All Screens button gives you the ability to see a list of all the screens that are currently in the application. From here, you can perform certain actions on the screens, like deleting them, for example, or marking one of them as being the entry point to the application. And we'll talk more about that as we get to builds in a later video. Next to that, you've got the new screen button, which allows you to create a new screen from a blank canvas or by selecting one of the available templates. And we'll go through using a few of those soon. Above this, the list of widgets, next to it, you have components. And a component is basically a way for you to create a custom widget. Many user interfaces typically have some parts of the UI that are reused throughout the application. So by using components, it gives you the ability to be able to create that part of the UI just once, and then you drag and drop it just like you do to these widgets onto the canvas, and it avoids you having to re-implement the same look and feel or same component on every screen that needs it. So it's a way for you to effectively achieve reusability in your application. Just at the top, we have the ability for you to choose a particular breakpoint to work with. Now, Hypi has chosen a mobile first approach, and what that means is that the breakpoints will start by default at the smallest breakpoint that's available, and then any properties that are applied to the smallest breakpoint, they get inherited by the larger ones. One thing worth noting is that all the widgets that you have on screen are shared across all the breakpoints. If you don't want a particular widget or a set of widgets to be visible, then you can control that using this toggle, which if you select it, for example, if you choose for it not to be visible on this breakpoint, then it will become hidden, and at that point, that aspect of the UI won't be visible on this particular breakpoint. It will still be visible on the other breakpoint. So if I was to switch to small, you can see that the small still has the container that is not visible on the extra small breakpoint. And that's how you can control and show different pieces of UI depending on the size of the screen that the user is currently using the application. On the right hand side, you have the properties panel. The properties panel allows you to control different aspects of the particular widget that's currently selected. So you can see that as I hover on the canvas, the widget that I'm hovering gets highlighted, and if I select that, the properties on the right get updated to reflect the options that are available for that particular widget that's currently selected. And then just at the top, you have some very useful options to be able to duplicate, copy, or cut and paste widgets that you have on screen, and that just gives you the ability to be able to pick a piece of UI and basically move it somewhere else, or copy it or duplicate it elsewhere in the application or on the current screen. This text box at the top allows you to be able to name any widget. So right now, if you look at the tree over here, it just says change me. And if you select the icon, you can see it just says icon with some ID at the end. This isn't very user friendly, and if you have a more semantically useful name, you can rename all of your widgets as you have them on screen. So for example, this is useful for text fields. If you're creating a form, you can rename a text field, for example, to be username or password, and that way it's easier to identify and work with when you're in the logic panel, which is something we'll come on to next actually. Once you finish putting together the layout for your screens, the next place that you'd probably spend a lot of time is in the logic panel. The logic panel allows you to be able to make your application be useful. So it allows you to be able to perform actions based on events that occur in the application. So if the user presses a button, for example, then you want something to happen. If it's to submit a form or search for some data or whatever action is relevant to your application, the logic blocks that are available in here is how you would enable that to happen. And we'll come on to show what some of the blocks available are and how you would use them in subsequent videos. But effectively, the logic panel is where you come to make your application do something useful. Next, you have collections. A lot of applications will need to store data somewhere, and this is where collections come in. You can create one or more collections to be able to represent the data that's needed in your application. So in this series, we're going to create a to-do app. It's going to be a relatively simple application, so we won't spend too much time in collections, but effectively we'll come in here and we'll show you how you might model the data that you need to store in your application using collections, and then be able to create, fetch and delete data from that collection using the blocks in the logic panel. Next, you have builds. Now, you can always use the preview button up here to be able to see a kind of real-time view of the application as you're working on it. But once you need to be able to show this to stakeholders, be able to send it to your users or customers, you need to create a build and send them something. And this is where the build screen comes in. The build screen allows you to choose which platform you're going to publish the application to, provide various options that are relevant for that particular platform, and then start a build to get an output that effectively can be sent to some third party for them to install and use it on their phone in the case of iOS and Android, or on desktop for the other platforms, and web, which is enabled by default. You've also got the design preview, and this just allows you to be able to quickly navigate through the screens in the application without any logic. So it doesn't depend on the buttons that are in your application. So if you have screens that perhaps has a long user journey to get to, but you just want to be able to see that all the screens look okay, you can navigate through them by just clicking the left and right arrows at the bottom without having to interact with anything on the actual screen. It's worth noting that no events are connected in the design preview. So even if you clicked on buttons in the design preview, nothing will happen because we don't wire up the events in that mode. The events, however, are wired up in the actual preview mode. So when you're in the preview mode, it's fully interactive, it's fully functional, and you can use it as if you were using it on the phone, and it will work exactly as it will work on a mobile phone. Finally, you have assets, and a lot of applications will have things like images or other files that the app needs to be able to use at some point. And the assets panel allows you to be able to upload those and make them available. And we'll show you how you could take advantage of this in a follow-up video. Lastly, I did say finally, but last thing in here that's worth mentioning are the settings that are in the bottom left. The settings allow you to be able to configure different aspects of the editor. the settings are user specific. So when you are saving settings in here, each user can save and customize settings according to whatever they prefer. One of the things that you can do, you'll see that there are 41 widgets enabled by default, but there are over 130 of them, 133 to be exact, that are actually available. And you can search through the list. If you are familiar with Flutter and various widgets that are in the Flutter framework, you can basically find the widget that you're interested in from the Flutter framework, and then by simply selecting it and closing that, the list view widget that I just selected has now become enabled, and you can then use that on the design canvas that we were looking at earlier. One thing worth mentioning here is the way that Hypi handles widgets and the properties that those widgets support. So looking at the list view here, what it shows you is that it has a parameter called children, which is a list of widgets. Now, in Hypi, what we've done is we've allowed you to be able to use a different controller to effectively control how that particular property is going to be handled. And Hypi has by default provided a wide number of controllers to support various property types in the Flutter framework. So in most cases, when you come to one of these widgets, you'll find that there's a default controller already selected, because Hypi has tried to provide a controller for pretty much all of the common property types that you'll find most widgets will use. However, if there isn't a controller already, or for example, if you've built a custom widget, you're able to develop a custom controller and make that available in the editor, and that's something that we'll demonstrate in a future advanced video that will require you or a third-party developer to write some code and have that imported into the editor. Next, you have the build and deploy settings and billing and subscription. So under builds and deploy, you can effectively create shared settings. I showed the build screen earlier, and that build screen allows you to override what is selected in the shared settings by default. So anything that's configured here, so if we enable all of these properties here, for example, and we jump over to the build area and then try to start a build, you'll see that because we enabled those in the settings, they've now become enabled by default here when we try to start a build. So that's effectively what the shared setting does. It allows you to enable default options that will become available by default for every new build that you create. And specifically for Android, in order to be able to publish the app to the Google App Store for you, we need to take some information about you and your organization, and we use that to generate a certificate that's required by Google when the application is uploaded. So Hypi will automatically perform the sign-in for you. If you're familiar or understand what that means, then basically Hypi automatically does the sign-in. You simply just need to provide the various information that's requested here and press the generate certificate button, and then that allows us to be able to sign the application, upload it, and do publishing and manage the deployments for you to the Google App Store automatically when you do your releases. Finally, we have the build section where you can manage your payment methods. You can choose a plan that you would like to subscribe to, and you can see the rate limits that you currently have allocated to your application. Under rate limits, there are currently 3 separate rate limits that are available. Okay, so it might look like the information is duplicated, but they're really not. You need to think about 3 aspects when you work with Hypi. well, you don't need to, but there are three aspects that are there. The first one is the editor itself. When you're developing your application, the editor is sending requests to the Hypi platform and saving data for you. When you're uploading files, it's uploading them to the Hypi API and all of that. So the editor that you're using needs its own rate limits. So by default, Hypi will allocate some rate limits for you to be able to perform those actions. And as you can see here, it allocates a relatively generous amount on the free plan that allows you to build out your app without having to subscribe before you have to get additional limits. Then once you've got going, there are then two pieces that you need to think about. There is the development version of your app and the production version of your app. The development version of your app is what's used when you press preview. If you have a form and you submit data in that form, the data will go into a test instance. This test instance is completely isolated from your production instance, right? And what that means is that you're able to do your development, do all of your testing, make changes, and all of that without affecting your production application, right? So if your app is already live, it means that whilst you're developing and making changes, any changes that you make, if they happen to break something, it won't have any impact on your production instance, because all of the development and testing goes into your dev instance, and your dev instance has its own rate limits. Just as your dev instance has its own rate limits, you then also have a production instance. And this production instance itself has its own rate limits, all right? And is, as I said, completely isolated from your dev instance. So one common thing that happens to some people when they start using Hypi is that they will create an account during development, and then when they publish the app to the App Store, they're confused as to why the account that they created in dev doesn't exist when the app is published. And that's because the data for during the development has gone into your development instance. So it doesn't exist in your production instance, and there is no way for you to access the data from the dev instance in the production instance. They are completely isolated, right? And that is better for your application, better for your customers, and ensures that you don't accidentally break your production app after it's been published. So, in a nutshell, I think that provides a quick overview of the vast majority of features that are available in the no-code aspect of the Hypi editor. In a separate video, we're going to talk about the low-code features, and then we're also going to dive into building an actual application. In this series, we're going to focus on building a simple to-do app, and those videos will come subsequently.